Pantheon number 15. The family Terradas Bertran, as most as the families treat in this virtual tour, made a fortune out of textile. They also invested in the real estate sector. In the Casa de les Punxes, in Avenue Diagonal 416 in Barcelona, in the center of Barcelona, in between the new town and a neighborhood called Gracia, the family, apart from showing their might, building a whole block of houses, they also made good benefits renting out the many apartments for the four-story building. Many houses in the Eixample, Barcelona's new town, follow this pattern. Ground level for garage or shop for the products that the very same owners of the building manufacture in their factories. Then we find a principal floor with an outwardly tribune, a loggia, for the family who owned the whole building and who had paid for the cost. And the apartments of the upper floors, they were to sell or rent out. Both in the Eixample as in the cemetery, Puig always shaped Christian beliefs and the ideals of Catalanity, industry and social success of that family. The pantheon starts with a primitive, rustic, very mighty sound steps flight and then continues with a bronze column richly chiseled or supposedly chiseled because obviously it was cast in bronze with zoomorphic figures, worked out by Eusebi Arnau. That sculpture worked together with the architect Puig in many houses of Barcelona, as for example in the Casa Ametller. Eusebi Arnau also was required by Domènec Montaner to decorate the Font d'Espanya, the Palau de la Música Catalana, and the Hospital de Sant Pau i la Santa Creu. Coming back to our bronze column, we can see an outstanding narration of rich symbology, bringing us in a spiral to the summit of a column that somehow is like the tree of life, a column of life projecting us to heaven, the ascension going up, the verticality that one feels with a cypress tree, with a column, with a sharp temple tower, a cross, or in other ways, but always vertical, like a post or like a shaft, is something almost ever present in all the pantheons. Pantheon number 16. The chapel of the Barbey Poinsard shows a style very common in the cemetery, neo-gothic. Very few families risk for their mausoleums that, let us remember, this word comes from supposedly a huge mausoleum, a huge tomb, like monumental tomb of a satrap, one of these petty kings, or not so petty, that was called Mausello in the very ancient times. So as we were saying, very few families risk for their mausoleums the extravagance of the waving curves of the Modernisme. Contrariwise, grave Gothicism was a sure investment as it was institutionalized as a religious and funerary art par excellence. Nevertheless, even in the neo-Gothic pantheons, one can find a playful and free line. It depends the degree of orthodoxy following that Gothicism that we can go from full neo-Gothicism to full eclecticism. That means a variation of styles to try to make something new out of copying elements of different periods or styles. That is the meaning of eclecticism. Jules Barbey-Ponsard was the president of the Companyia d'Indústries Agrícoles, so company of agricultural industries, and made a fortune with the sugar beet, which factories were in Cuenca, Jalón, and Épila, some provinces or towns in Spain, not really in Catalonia. We can read, Qui credit in me etiam si mortus fuerit vivet, who believes in me, though death, shall remain alive. Engraving of messages comes to appease the sadness for losing the beloved ones. These engravings were also useful for the very same Mecenas, the future resident of the tomb. that would sometimes in advance commission the house for eternity to the artist. Some other famous epitaphs are Qui credit in me habet vitam aeternam. Who believes in me, eternal life shall have. Not obit, habit, not dead, gone. And the famous rip, rest in peace, requiem in pace, and Roman sentences like sit tibi terra levis, be the earth life for you. 15 bis. In the other side of the terraces tomb that we have covered in 14 is to be seen the bronze column crowned with little churches. Heaven is for those who follow the directions of the church, the goal to reach. And meanwhile, the church that is like a step in between or a place where God interlinks with humanity, so finds this appeasement and this kind of preparation in the church. Within the pile of bodies in high relief are some symbols to be seen as the balance for the souls of the final judgment, the snake of the paradise, and some others, like a whole. In the base of the monument, we can see the letters for beginning and end, because all starts with God's will for giving us life, and all will end at His will. Ego sum lux mundi, Alpha and Omega. So I am the light of the world, the beginning and the end. Normally preach the Pantocrators of the Romanist churches, these almighty, all-seeing gods from the 10, 11, 12 churches, the frescoes that normally were painted. A special one, number 8, Palafares, angel lifting up a fearful gal, making very clear the carrying duty of these winged creatures. Very skillful was the sculptor as he injected movement into these figures. The long cloak hides the base. Indeed, it seems as they are taking off. The angel shows the efforts to start the flight while also communicates all the care given to the conduction, to this conduction of a human soul. The latter is given herself fully to her fate. Let us remember, most of them they were done with the local stone from this very same cemetery. So this cemetery actually was filling the gap left by the very old stone quarries that since the Romans they were taking here a very good sandstone that was the construction stone, no, to make islers and different elements of Roman walls, of Roman churches, Gothic churches, even more modern churches like Sagrada Familia. And you can see the difference in between the quality because there were some parts of this hill, of these quarries, that was like first class sandstone, more white, more hard, more compact, that is more resistant to the exfoliation and to this stone illness. But there were some parts of the hill that the stone was a bit softer and cheaper. And when the sculptor or the commissioner said, look, I want this budget, make a sculpture with this more cheap sandstone, then is when nowadays they are in a worse state. But in general, it's a quite a good quality stone, but also the location or later what appeared at the feet of the cemetery, that is a motorway and the port with some chimneys and some factories that also adds a plus of aggression to the stone that together with the humidity, with the rain, even with the pollen of the trees and all these things. So that is why when we walk through the cemetery sometimes we feel a bit pity for the state of conservation of this great sculptural garden of angels. Now here we cover B. To talk about the sepulchre of Mercedes Casas de Villanova is to talk about the Desconsol, the Affliction, one of the most celebrated sculptures of the Catalan Modernisme. This girl, whom we want to see her face, is one of the four elements making up the sepulchre. The stairs, the girl, the ghostly figure, and the coffin. All are wrapped by some kind of falling off, with round and curvy corners, like softened edges and groins. Some years later, Giuseppe Mona isolated the figure of the girl, undressing her to shape her in marble. This work is to be seen in the Manac National Art Museum of Catalonia, and one of the versions is right in front of the Catalan parliament. A spider net covers the face of of a sitting woman, an unexpected gloomy touch to the scene. We are attracted to the scene due to the effective play of opposites, youth versus elderly, cold resignation versus absolute grief. Following up the path, very decorative, stands up a pair of Venice dactylera, very helpful to appease the sadness. This type of palm, that phoenix actually means rebirth, this myth of a kind of eagle that he lived many, many years, but at the end he wanted to meet his fate, that was to kill himself in a kind of fire, but then out of the ashes he was born again. And the way that the palm leaves stay open in a kind of continuous, so when they get drier, slowly, slowly from the center opens again, a kind of cone, very sharp cone, and out of it they will open the leaves and so on, like a never ending. They used to be the present given to the martyrs, to the saints, and so phoenix and dactylera means that makes dates. This type of fruit that with bacon is so yummy, and also it has a very nice green. So for this reason, as we were saying, very helpful to appease the sadness. Within the family of the palm trees, the Phoenix canariensis are also very appropriate as there is no breaks in between trunk, branches, and leaves. So there are other palm trees like the Washingtonia that there is a difference between trunk and the leaves. While the Canarienses, it's a continuum. Together with the cypress trees, the star tree of the cemeteries, or of this one, is the palm tree. Though we have to use it with moderation, as the dark green of the cypress trees must dominate the scene. Let us remember how the palm tree always was the symbol for resurrection, and as we were commenting, as a present for the martyrs. So as we were saying, the very same name Phoenix for palm tree is very informative. The martyrs used to hold palm leaves, and in Easter the palm leaves is present in all celebration, Palm Day. The meaning of flowers and vegetation is sometimes shared by different cultures, while sometimes the symbology of trees and plants can be very different. For the Chinese people, the peach tree stands for eternity, while in the Christian graveyard, fruit trees are almost out of sight. Pantheon number 17. Ragurdosa's tomb shows a great work of craftsmanship. The turn of the century was a sweet moment for the applied arts. Architects, clients, all had a whole idea of what was art. Therefore, to complete a work of art, came together many artists and craftsmen from different fields, from different backgrounds. The Palau de la Música Catalana is perhaps one of the best examples of that idea of total art. So this term, total art, is one of the characteristics that brought forward the Modernisme or the Art Nouveau in French, modern style, Jugendstil, stilo florale, total art, or whiplash. Total art, that in German is also informative, how they say this term, Gesamtkunstwerke. That means work of art together. Gesamt, that is a bit of here, a bit of there, a bit of stained glass, a bit of mosaic, a bit of sculpture, a bit of wrought iron. So the meeting, the reunion, or the coming together of different applied arts or high arts like painting, sculpture, that makes a piece of art. It's not just architecture alone or just sculpture alone, it should be like a choral work. In our tomb, the outstanding wrought iron work is nowadays managed cause oxidation in an open air monument that it's increased even more the oxidation. Standing up in the corners, the iron posts look like candles melting down, a source of fire keeping alive the memory of the deceased. All piles from the corners, low fences, letters, all seems like melting down. But it's a process that is not final destruction. It's like a reintegration, something that will melt down but will be ending up reintegrated in the shapeless matter. The business of the Recordosa goes hand in hand with the recent history of the Pont de Vilomara village in Catalonia. There, Making the most of the river current power, so the water power, a cotton factory was installed, a cotton mill. With the introduction of the steam, the factory went through some changes, and the families started to split the investments, taking share in other companies, as rail companies. By the end of the 19th century, Catalonia was adopting modern ways of the capitalism. It was the transition from family companies to corporation playing in the stock exchange, looking for capital. What here is known as Societat Anònima was the common formula to finance public works, infrastructure, necessary infrastructure to build up a modern nation. Nobody wanted to risk too much money, and thus splitting the capital in many shares, the required financial effort was shared by the industrial of time. So all these pantheons we are covering are part of the artistical value, also very interesting to go through the economy of the time and the ticons of the times. So that it was important the making of sugar, that it was important the making of rum, that it was important the textile, that it was important the factories in the city move with coal and steam machine, but also the factories next to the river that they save the cost from the coal, and also was a way these cotton mills very common along the river Cardener or river Llobregat that ends actually in Barcelona but comes from the Pyrenees. Also, many capitalists wanted to have the factories there because then the workers were more quiet in the city, so they could go strike. They were going to the tavern. They were going to a place to hear the trade unionists, the anarchists, the communists. So making a cotton mill, making a little village, and under that control, they practice what has been called the paternalism. But on the other hand, while somehow the worker families lost some degree of freedom because they were under the surveillance and the control of the capitalists, they used to have a better standard of life, school for their children, even health assistance, and this kind of things. And as we were saying, all these families here buried, they were from a period of transition. Their parents, or even themselves when they were younger, it was a family-owned business, but then the capitalism was changing and was growing, and is when it was not so owned by one family, but they let enter other families in the capital share, and also they were investing in real estate and so on.